I'm going to be straight with you. I did not expect to come out of Las Vegas this week feeling the way I'm feeling right now. And I've been watching this franchise long enough to know the difference between something real and something manufactured. This wasn't smoke and mirrors. This wasn't a team trying to convince itself it's something it's not. What happened at the Raiders facility during their first week of OTAs felt different in a way I genuinely wasn't prepared for. And I've spent the last several days trying to process exactly why. So let me walk you through it, because if you're not paying close attention to what's being constructed in Las Vegas right now, you are genuinely going to miss the moment it happens. Let's start with Germaine McCoy, because no matter how many times I try to open with something else, this is where my brain keeps landing, and for good reason. The full picture of this situation is one of the most fascinating stories in the league right now, and most people outside of Nevada haven't truly reckoned with what it means. Here's what you need to understand. McCoy is a fourth-round pick who by nearly every serious pre-draft evaluation possessed legitimate first-round ability. Not the kind where analysts are stretching to make a case. Not the kind where you squint at the tape and see potential buried under flaws. Genuine top 10 pick caliber talent. The kind that makes scouts lean forward in their chairs and reach for their phones. He fell to the fourth round for exactly one reason: his knee. That's the whole story. The Raiders looked at that gap between his talent and his draft position, decided the talent was undeniable and the risk was manageable, and made the pick. The value discrepancy there is almost absurd in a league where information moves this fast. Now here's what happened this week that actually matters. McCoy isn't being protected. He's not in a bubble. He's not getting a careful, gradual introduction to the professional game, while the real work happens elsewhere. He is running first-team reps, in the 7s, in the 11s, in the very first week of organized team activities. When a coaching staff makes that decision with a fourth-round rookie, they are not making it casually. There is no version of that choice that happens by accident. What that tells you is that everything the Raiders evaluated on tape before the draft, every attribute, every trait, every instinct, is showing up on the live field exactly the way they hoped, and the downstream effect of that matters even more than the immediate headline. The veterans working alongside McCoy in those team periods right now are already building the kind of unconscious familiarity with his movement and his instincts that you simply cannot fast track. That chemistry accumulates quietly over weeks and months. By the time training camp opens, McCoy won't be an unfamiliar new piece getting inserted into something already built. He'll be a piece the system was organized around. That is a fundamentally different situation, and the Raiders coaching staff clearly understands the difference. Traden Stokes is someone I want to spend real time on, because what he's doing in these early practices speaks directly to a question I raised before the draft. And I want to be honest about that, because being honest about the questions you ask is how you know whether the answers actually mean anything. The question was whether Stokes could hold up in a true nickel corner role at this level, because his college alignment at Arizona was deeply scheme dependent. Cover 4 structures, 3 safety looks, the kind of coverage environment that can mask certain vulnerabilities in press situations. The legitimate concern was whether he'd survive against elite slot receivers in genuine one-on-one moments when the NFL's speed and precision hit him full force. That was a fair thing to wonder about. Then Trevin Johnson held out for more guaranteed money. The situation didn't resolve cleanly, and suddenly Stokes was absorbing every available rep that opened up. And from what's coming out of Henderson, he has been exceptional, alert, physical, capable of moving fluidly between responsibilities without losing focus or getting caught in between assignments. He's not just surviving in the vacancy, he's making a case. And here's why that performance carries even more weight than it might seem on the surface. Robbie Leonard's defensive architecture is built on blitz volume. I expect this Raiders defense to be among the league leaders in blitz percentage this season, possibly among the very best. In that environment, a defender who can align in multiple spots and shift responsibilities without getting confused is not a luxury. He is a structural necessity. Stokes is looking like that player. If he maintains this trajectory, the conversation around him is going to shift significantly before August is over. Fernando Mendoza is a story I need to handle carefully, because it's easy to either overcook or undercook depending on how you approach it. The enthusiasm for him inside that organization is not the manufactured variety. It's not the kind of optimism teams produce to keep the fan base occupied during quiet months. When Andrew Janovich makes comments about a rookie quarterback's football EQ being years ahead of where you'd normally find a first-year player, he's not throwing that out there to fill airtime. The detail that stood out to me specifically, the detail that actually reveals something real, is that Mendoza doesn't just absorb the playbook, he interrogates it. He asks why about every concept, not just what. He wants to understand the reasoning beneath the structure, not simply memorize the structure. That kind of curiosity is genuinely rare in a young quarterback. It tends to compound over time in ways that can be difficult to fully appreciate when you're looking at OTA reports in May and trying to project what someone becomes. But Clint Kubiak is being methodical about this. and I think that's exactly correct. Mendoza is working primarily with the rookies and younger players right now. He's building rhythm, sharpening his footwork, which both he and the staff have openly identified as a specific developmental priority this offseason, and doing the foundational work that cannot be bypassed regardless of natural ability. The reality of the quarterback room is this: Kirk Cousins is absorbing the overwhelming majority of first-team reps, and that is not going to change. Aidan O'Connell is operating with the twos. Mendoza is developing in a controlled environment that gives him room to make mistakes without the weight of a real competition pressing down on every single snap, unless something genuinely unexpected happens. And I mean structurally unexpected, not the idle speculation that fills space when people are bored in May. Cousins is your Week 1 starter in Las Vegas. That should be clear to anyone paying attention. The Mendoza story isn't this season's depth chart. It's what a full year of development inside a functional system does to a quarterback who already asked the right questions. That's the timeline worth watching. And right now, those conditions look genuinely favorable. But the thing I keep returning to, the thing I cannot stop thinking about when I try to understand what this offense is actually going to look like in 2026, is what Kubiak said about Ashton Jeanty, because he didn't speak the way coaches usually speak in May when they're trying not to commit to anything. He wasn't vague. He wasn't hedging. He was direct in a way that told you something real about how this offense is being designed. He said he wants to put as much pressure on Jeanty as possible. He talked about maximizing not just his rushing volume, but his involvement as a receiver out of the backfield. And then he said something that I think is actually the most revealing thing to come out of any conversation from that facility this week. He referenced Christian McCaffrey by name, not as a stylistic comparison, as a philosophical model. McCaffrey's snap percentage is historically high because he is an elite back who does not want to leave the field. And Kubiak wants Jeanty operating with that exact same mentality. On the field, available, involved, touched. I need you to understand why that is so much more significant than a head coach expressing enthusiasm for his best player, because it's easy to hear it and nod and move on. The offensive philosophy Kubiak is describing: center your attack around an elite running back, force defenses to commit resources to eliminating him, then capitalize on every pocket of space that commitment creates elsewhere, is one of the most consistently effective frameworks in modern professional football when the right talent is there to execute it. When you have a back who generates positive yards between the tackles on a consistent basis, who forces safeties down into the box, who demands genuine defensive attention on early downs, you are rewriting the math that opposing coordinators have to solve on every single series. They have to account for the run threat with extra bodies, which means corners end up isolated on the outside with less help, which means receivers who would otherwise be covered in balanced schemes start seeing cleaner situations. The run game engineers the passing game. This is not a new idea, but it requires a featured back with genuine elite qualities at the center of it. And in Jeanty, the Raiders have exactly that. This offense, if executed the way Kubiak is describing it, has a logic to it that makes sense regardless of what the receiver room looks like on paper. And about that receiver room, I'm not going to pretend the depth chart there wins any roster strength arguments. Dante Thornton, Jalen Naylor, Trey Tucker, Malik Benson, these are players who are capable of making plays. But the relevant question isn't whether they can win against a safety-loaded secondary that's allocating attention correctly. The relevant question is whether they can win one-on-one against a corner who's been left isolated precisely because the defense committed extra resources to Jeanty. And the answer to that question is yes. Then you layer Brock Bowers on top of everything else, and Bowers is genuinely one of the most dangerous receiving tight ends in the entire league right now. There is no defense that can afford to leave him uncovered, which means every team that faces the Raiders has to think about him on every snap, and thinking about him creates problems somewhere else. Put it all together: a dominant featured back drawing attention, a tight end weapon that demands accounting for, receivers finding clean looks downstream from all of it. And what you have is a functional offense. An offense that can manage games and move the chains and put Kirk Cousins in position to do exactly what he does best without requiring him to carry more than his appropriate share. Kubiak addressed the running back depth situation publicly too, and what he said revealed something about the competitive standard he's trying to build throughout this roster. Drafting Mike Washington signals that the organization is thinking seriously about who handles Jeanty's breathers and how that rotation operates under real in-game conditions. But Kubiak was clear about the standard. The best option earns the snaps. The rotation isn't going to be managed artificially by draft round or contract status. Jeanty earns his touches by being the most effective option available, and whoever claims the backup role does so through the same process. That is a healthy organizational culture, and it tells you something real about the environment Kubiak is constructing. Tyler Linderbomb is the piece of this offense that I genuinely cannot understand why the broader conversation isn't making more noise about. This is not simply a solid starting center being added to a roster. This is a player player who fundamentally changes how an entire offensive line operates, and the reasons go well beyond what any box score can communicate. Linderbomb is technically precise in a way that the position's best players are and its average players approximate. He communicates protection adjustments before the snap. He identifies pressure packages and redirects help before the pocket collapses, rather than scrambling to adapt after the damage is already happening. The center is effectively the quarterback of the offensive line, the one making calls that organize everyone else around him. And upgrading that position doesn't improve your run blocking and your pass protection as isolated categories. It improves your offensive line's capacity to function as a coordinated system under pressure. Linderbomb makes Cousins' job measurably easier. He makes the run game more reliable. He gives Kubiak's offense a structural foundation capable of absorbing what defenses throw at it and still executing. That is not a secondary piece. That is a cornerstone. The linebacker situation is something genuinely flying under the radar right now, and it should not be. Key Walker looks good. Let me be specific about why that landing matters, because Walker is a player whose career has been a cycle of extraordinary flashes followed by the kind of inconsistencies that make evaluators pull their hair out. When Walker is mentally locked in, physically right, fully committed to the assignment, he has the athleticism and the instincts to be among the more impactful off-ball linebackers in this conference. And here he is in a system that is going to ask him to be physical, aggressive, and decisive in the run fit. That plays directly to his strengths in a way that feels almost specifically designed for him. And when Nakobe Dean is alongside him, Dean was absent this week, reportedly at his wife's graduation, which, good for him, the world exists beyond football. The linebacker core of this defense looks genuinely different from anything Raiders fans have watched over the past several years. These two healthy and operating together inside Robbie Leonard's system is a combination that demands more attention than it's currently receiving. The concern I have, the honest one, not the manufactured kind, is the depth behind those two. Cody Epps has been absorbing the second-team reps in Dean's absence, and while the coaching staff appears to genuinely believe in him, the margin for error at that position group narrows sharply once you move beyond the top two names. Xavier Sori and Tom Yelkenberg are developmental players who haven't established themselves at this level yet. If Walker or Dean loses significant time to injury, you are asking young and unproven players to absorb snaps that a seasoned starter would normally handle. That's not a crisis today. It's the kind of depth vulnerability that reveals itself the hard way once a season starts and the physical accumulation of 16 games begins to grind through roster depth everywhere. On the defensive front, the direct and pointed challenge being directed at Jack Anderson and Dante Fowler this week is worth sitting with, because when a coaching staff uses specific language publicly about the urgency for specific players to develop quickly, they are communicating a standard. They are drawing a line and making sure everyone on both sides of it understands where it falls, whether Anderson or Fowler responds to that kind of direct competitive pressure. And who else might emerge in the process and claim a meaningful role is genuinely one of the more interesting developmental threads heading toward training camp. Trey Sermon working at tackle right now is just the beginning of what figures to be an interesting summer arc. The plan involves moving him across multiple positions. Guard is part of the picture, center is potentially part of the picture, and offensive linemen with genuine multi-position capability carry compounding value across a full season that tends to get underestimated. Versatile depth linemen don't just provide injury insurance, they give a coaching staff real flexibility in how they construct and adjust game plans week to week. They create competitive pressure throughout the entire depth chart by eliminating the assumption that a roster spot is secure simply by remaining healthy. How far Sermon's adaptability actually extends will clarify as summer progresses, but the early signal from week 1 is encouraging. When I step back from everything and look at this week as a whole, what keeps coming back to me is the coherence of it. This is not a perfect roster. There is no perfect roster in May, and this one carries real areas of uncertainty that honest evaluation cannot paper over. The receiver room needs the offensive system to manufacture the situations that make those players effective. They are not going to win in a vacuum. The linebacker depth is thin enough beyond the starting two to be a legitimate concern when physical attrition arrives. Whether Stokes holds up in genuine man coverage against elite slot receivers when September games are real and meaningful, that question cannot be fully settled by OTA reports regardless of how encouraging those reports are. But what I keep seeing when I actually look at this team, past the offseason noise, past the cynicism that flattens every roster into the same flat plane of uncertainty, is an organization that has made deliberate and coherent decisions about its identity and then built its roster with genuine intention behind those decisions. Teams that understand who they are, that have a real philosophy on both sides of the ball and real competitive standards throughout their depth chart tend to outperform their individual talent numbers. They find ways to win games that more talented but less organized rosters allow to slip away. And right now, heading into Week 2, the Las Vegas Raiders are starting to look like a team that knows exactly what it is trying to become. That matters more than people give it credit for, and it is absolutely worth watching closely as this offseason moves forward.